Good morning and welcome to SimWorld today. I'm Marsh, joined on this Wednesday, November 6th version of the show by B-Ron. Good morning, B-Ron.
Hey, Marsh, good morning, man. It's good to be here with you as always, and I'm excited to talk SimWorld.
Well, we got plenty of SimWorld to talk about. We had a big night in SimWorld U, all top four teams in action. We're going to talk about all of them. We're going to start with Kentucky. They get a win on the road. They rally back to beat UConn, but the aftermath of this one is more of a question mark. They trail by as many as 14. They end up winning by 3. But the question around them is this starting lineup. Adonis Knight has 20 points off the bench in 21 minutes. Meanwhile, Trey Trust hits 4 threes in 19 minutes to spur a comeback. Yet neither of them are starting. They're behind Stephon Burks and Trav Cunningham. Is it time for a change, or now at 8-0, do you just let it ride?
So first, before I get into that, I do want to say that I said it last night while I was watching the stream. The Kentucky looked like the Chiefs last night, finding ways to win a game. They were down big March, and they found a way to come back and win that game. So kudos to everyone doing that. To answer the question, though, I think you let it rock for now. It's working so far. I think you continue to let it be as it is. I do think though that because we had said this in one of our early games covering Kentucky when they were playing March. We had said maybe it's time to consider looking into it, at least considering starting Trey Trust and Adonis Knight. I think that the offense works better with those two on the floor with Gloria Tate and Jameson Johnson. I think that is their best five. But I do think that for now they're winning games and it's working. And I think you do need some kind of spark off the bench, and I think both those guys right now are doing that. And I worry that if they switch being starters, that you lose that production off the bench, and that's a big deal in the grand scheme of things too.
Yeah, this is a team that's built off really staggering their stars. So Glory Tate goes to the bench, Jameson Johnson stays out there. Jameson Johnson goes to the bench, Glory Tate stays out there. And Adonis Knight and Trey Trust have been the big part of why that's possible, because you can bring in guys off the bench that can be downhill scorers. Now, I've kind of oscillated between the two. On the one hand, yeah, you're winning games. I'm not a big proponent of changing things when they don't need to be changed. And in this case, I don't know that things need to be changed for Kentucky. You're 8-0 and you had a great comeback. But the reason you got this comeback and the reason you needed to make a comeback was because in the second half, they went to Adonis Knight and Trey Trust on the court for longer stretches of time than they had Stephon Burks and Trav Cunningham. And it shows up because you have Trey Trust is plus 12, Adonis Knight is plus 17, meanwhile Burks minus 11 and Cunningham is minus 12. They got blasted in the moments in which Burks and Cunningham were on the floor. Now, it's difficult to really say that should be the reason because you won the basketball game. The problem is that when you go with Burks and Cunningham, you lose the ability to shoot the ball. Glory Tate is the only three-point shooter on the floor in this team's starting lineup. Now, Adonis Knight's no knockdown shooter himself. He did hit a big three, hit a couple of them, went 2 for 2 last night. But in order for Jameson Johnson to get rolling, and we saw this when he was surrounded by Burks, Cunningham, Muto, and even Knight at one point, is that there's nowhere for defenders to be concerned about on the perimeter. And that ends up making Jameson Johnson, who ends up with a double-double, 16-11. Almost all of his points were coming from mid-range jumpers, fadeaway jumpers, kind of hook shots. He wasn't really dominantly getting into the paint because there was so many double teams coming his way from the UConn defense.
Yeah, and that's the danger you run when you leave, Gloria Tate on the bench. You leave Johnson on the floor by himself. That's when the double teams come. But if you have a guy like Trey Trust or a Knight out there, they're forced to pick between one of those three people and who to defend. And Johnson still was going to get his for sure, no doubt about that. But I again, my concern is just the fact that and the other thing too, Marsh, is if you do decide, hey, let's run Trey Trust and Adonis Knight on the floor with Gloria Tate and James Johnson for next game, and they don't do what they did against UConn, then it becomes a discussion of, well, why do we do that? We should have just stuck with what worked. They had a bad game. Look at that. It's a one-game reaction, yeah, but Marsh, we know how media is. We're in it. We know how this goes.
Yeah, I would not expect a move to be made anytime soon. I would expect to see some rotation moves because Glory Tate also 4 minutes left in this game took a seat on the bench. So I think there's some serious question marks. maybe they're not ones that you dive into, but they're ones to keep an eye on in terms of the rotations here for Kentucky. All right, let's head to Duke and Butler, the second game of our CBS broadcast, and this was not much of a game. 55-27 at the break, and Duke rolls 88-65. A complete game from Duke. Cooper Flagg was fantastic in this one. 18 points, had 4 blocks. Demario Duval with 13 off the bench in just 15 minutes. Jeremiah Minor did Jeremiah Minor things, taking 23 shots on his way to 20 points. But Butler was going to have to win this game by playing good defense. They did not get that.
No, did not at all. And when you talk about being concerned for Butler, look, I think that I saw a tweet last night that said maybe Butler was ranked too high. Maybe so. I think the 12 was a little ambitious for them personally, even though they did have some, big wins to get to that 12th spot. We over Tennessee especially. But yeah, 12 was a little high in my opinion. But I don't think that the concern is there for Butler for me. I just think that Duke was just that good, if that makes sense, between the two things. I think Butler is going to come down to earth, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, I think Butler's got a good track record. We've seen that so far, but I think that what we saw last night, and we're going to get to the other two teams that were in action, is that the top 4 teams are the top 4 teams. And I talked about this on the Marsh Pod a couple weeks ago, is that where that line of good teams is, I thought at the time was maybe 5 to 7 teams. I think now it's more seriously in the 1 through 4 range, because Duke is just really good. And Butler, for as good as their defense is, that's how they have to win basketball games. They have to slow it down. They have to beat you in kind of a slugfest. It's tough to do that against a team like Duke, who has Cooper Flagg, who has Demario Duval, who has Roderick Little, who had a good night, Victoria Ilgauskas. Duke's the number 2 team for a reason. I'm not necessarily concerned here for Butler. I think this was as much of anything a statement by the Blue Devils at home to say we are legitimate in this win, and not so much that Butler doesn't necessarily deserve to be there, because they're still a good team. I just think that they're part of this kind of secondary class right now in SimWorld U, and not necessarily the top 4 teams, which have been dominant. Let's get to that, where both Gonzaga and number 4 and number 3 Alabama were in action. Bama wins over Boise State 60-44. Gonzaga wins over TCU 76-58. Ship and Luffy were great there for Gonzaga, and Dwayne Epps and Levin Cutler again with a great night for the Crimson Tide. So my question to you after last night, who were you most impressed with as all top 4 teams got a win last night?
Between Gonzaga and Alabama, you mean? Or the
top 4 teams, all 4 of them.
Okay.
Who were you more impressed with?
Gotcha. Just wanted to clarify. Kentucky last night. Just because, again, that game didn't start off too well for them, and they ended up, making that a game and ended up winning the game. So for me, that is the one that I'm most impressed by. It looked like Marsh, they were gonna get possibly blown out at one point.
Mm-hmm.
So for them to fight back in that game the way they did and get, again, Trey Truss and Jonathan having the big games that they did from those freshmen, I think that for me, all of that combined together makes that the most impressive win from the top 4 teams last night. And they're undefeated still to the result. So even better.
Yeah, well, I'm going to go, my most impressed would be Duke. I thought Gonzaga and Alabama, just to talk about them real quick, I thought they both played well, but neither of them had the kind of statement, right? Gonzaga actually really, torched TCU, but that's not a team that I look at and say, okay, yeah, this is a really tough opponent. Same thing with Alabama. I mean, that's still my question, or my thought process, or my thoughts in general of, like, why is DJ Childs doing this? I mean, 9 points last night in the win. This is a Dwayne Epps and this is a Quincy Henderson-led team, it seems like, more often than not. DJ Childs took those 9 shots. Now, part of that is from this team just being deep, but it's making me kind of question his long-term viability if, he's not at least doing a little bit more than this, but that's neither here nor there, because Duke just smashed one of the best teams that we've seen early on. Butler got to number 12 not because they beat nobody. They beat some good teams. They took down North Carolina. They were blowing out teams. They've had a really good season thus far, and Duke made it look like they were an unranked team. And that continues to be the fear that Duke is going to put into anybody, is you're going to walk into our arena and we're going to give you the hardest 40 minutes of basketball that you're going to play, because Cooper Flagg is the best player in college basketball, because we have a paint defender, and because we've got guys on the perimeter that can score. Now, I can have my opinions about Jeremiah Minor taking 23 shots, the most shots of anybody in that game last night, but you still shot 49% despite him shooting 8 of 23. That's how good the rest of this roster is, and when they're on, they are pretty much impossible to stop. And we saw that last night against Butler. So to me, of the top 4 teams in action, I would say Duke was the most impressive team of all of them. All right, let's head on over to our SimWorld U wrap-up. A lot of games in action, and we start with Oklahoma State and Indiana as we get geared up for this one. A big night for Indiana. They get their first win of the season. A tough night from Mackenzie Mbako. It doesn't matter. Keontae Dior has 13, and Indiana uses a big second half to win this one. VCU and Jackson State. It'd be VCU's Maverick Jackson Jones, MJJ carrying the way 17-7, and the Rams get a home win 69-63 on the road to South Carolina, and that is where a huge night from one Keandre Baldridge, 21-11, propels the Gamecocks to an 81-74 win. On the road to Oregon and Creighton, Timothy Brown uses a big dunk to propel the second half at 3 straight wins for the Ducks, 61-47 over Creighton. Meanwhile, in Houston, it's Washington State, formerly ranked. They go into the Houston Cougars Dome, and they walk out with a 71-68 win. They're now 4-2, dropping the Cougars to 2-3. Tennessee on the road to Minnesota. It'd be a high-profile, big shooting night, and Trey Turner leads the way with 24. Malik Riles with 23 and a 103-98 win for the Volunteers. Rounding out in Texas for St. Mary's, Kai Newby 18, Brandon Romine 16 and 15, and the Bigs for St. Mary's outplay Texas A&M's. They get the 77-74 win. SimWorld returns here on Wednesday night. UCLA and North Carolina from Chapel Hill at our 7 o'clock game, and then Kansas State hosting Georgia in the second game of our doubleheader. No top 25 versus top 25 matchups. We got a handful in action. Number 6 UCLA, number 10 Texas, number 13 Memphis, and number 8 Arkansas, as the Arkansas Razorbacks making a case to try to be a top 5 team this season. All right, B-Ron, that's our show. Appreciate you coming on. We will see you, I believe, again tomorrow morning as we round out the week, keep on moving ahead, and then we'll keep talking SimWorld U. SWBA returns to action as well tonight. We'll talk some of that as well tomorrow morning. B-Ron, thanks for coming on. Thank you all for joining us here on SimWorld TV, the only place you can see the game, be the game.
This has been a presentation